Hey, what's going on, you guys? This is the Little Dicey podcast, hosted by yours truly, Salvador Sabranca, and my co-host Matt Kassan. We play some Dungeons and Dragons together, and we're also very good friends. We don't just. This is the first episode of our podcast. This is kind of in conjunction with our Dungeons and Dragons sort of home game stream that we play together. You can, by the way, find that on twitch.tv/a little dicey DND. That is the letters DND at the end of that. And we have a homebrew Dungeons and Dragons game. We play it every week, Wednesday night, 6 p.m. to about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we do a whole myriad of other things on that channel, so definitely go check that out if for somehow you are hearing this but haven't seen that one, which would be very interesting, but who knows, stranger things have happened. Yeah, like I said, this is sort of it's not necessarily a supplementary podcast to that live streamed game experience, but we just figured we've got a lot to say. We really love this game, tabletop games in general, just anything, and honestly, more of an excuse to just shoot the shit with you, Matt, is good for me. So, how you feeling, buddy?
I just want twice as many opportunities to wear my turtle and or mushroom themed t-shirts.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why I'm here. What are we talking about again?
Oh, just everything. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Turtles and mushrooms in particular, actually.
Welcome to our turtle and mushroom podcast.
Yes, yeah. That's our new game, actually, we're developing, Turtles and Mushrooms. It'll be very good. It's a hit for with the kids.
Classic.
Yeah. But, no, man, how's it going?
Yeah.
How you feeling right now?
I'm doing good. We had our second episode the other day.
We did.
Feeling very good about not only kind of our play experience as members of the game, but also some of the kind of feedback and engagement we're getting with the people.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I gotta say, the first and second games that we played, so it's so funny looking back, because like those VODs of the first 6 episodes, the content is so good, but Christ alive, the production is god awful. It's so funny. Like I don't know, the distance that we've already come, just production wise and whatnot, figuring these things out, like trial by fire kind of situation, has been really cool to see. If anybody's listening who maybe you've only seen our first 2 episodes of our quote unquote, I mean, it is a new campaign when it comes to us. Really, for everyone else, it's not really new. Like, it's new in the sense of they probably haven't seen our old one. You know what I mean?
Right,
with the exception of some people. But if you haven't seen the 10 episodes that we've done sort of before this, which was a previous campaign that we ran for a year and a half, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the very first day in the United States, at least or at least in Michigan. I think, it was countrywide that everybody. Yeah. So the very first day of quarantine during the very, very beginning of the pandemic for the United States was the day that we were supposed to meet in person and play our first game of Dungeons and Dragons together. I've been DMing for about five or 6 years now. Basically, I don't know, whenever the start of Critical Role happened, that was when I found D&D, or at least fell in love with it. And then shortly after, my 21st birthday came around, and I called some of my friends, and they were like, "Oh, we got to go out." And I was like, "Yeah, we'll do that. Can we play Dungeons and Dragons first?" And they were like, "Sure, man. Like, it's your birthday. Like, we'll do whatever." And I was like, "All right, cool." And then I was like, "Fuck, they don't know anything. I guess I have to Dungeon Master." And
Right.
So I just sort of learned, and my first games were ridiculous, and we probably didn't follow any rules beyond, like, this is how you roll this and whatnot. And I just tried to do my best Matt Mercer impression, and they seemed to like it. And then, 5 years later or whatever, now I'm playing some of the best games I've ever played, or actually, certainly the best games I've ever played with you guys, and specifically with you, Matt. So thank you for that. But,
yeah, it's an interesting kind of thing to think about in terms of your experience being kind of right out the gate, having that Critical Role as sort of an aspirational example, and jumping right into the DM seat from the beginning with a bunch of noobs. My experience, I played D&D, I believe it was 3.5 when I was in high school.
Gotcha.
And My
back in
dungeon
1962.
back in
Yeah,
1962,
of course.
right? Yep, we had just had the civil rights movement, and
Yeah.
I started
Yeah,
playing.
yeah.
um,
Dungeons and Dragons 5 came out just in conjunction with the civil rights.
yep,
Exactly. That's what
uh,
history is. That's how it works.
yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I was playing 3.5, and I had no idea any of the rules. It was a similar situation where we had somebody stepped up to be a DM, and I was a player, and I just kind of did what I was told.
Yeah.
I had a love of kind of role playing games in the video game sense, and so jumping into kind of a narrative based, plot based adventure game, was very interesting to me. In that experience, the sort of and I don't know if this is actually the rules of 3.5 or if this is just the way our DM ran it. But the way that we did it is we picked a character, a class that we wanted to be,
Right.
and then we rolled stats, but we rolled them in order, not like roll your stats and then assign them where you want.
Gotcha.
So basically, this is how it went. I said, I want to play wizard.
Yeah.
And then I rolled strength, and then I rolled dex, and
Yep.
then I rolled int and whatever.
Mhm.
And I ended up with like a 10 intelligence,
Yeah.
right? Like
No bonus.
no nothing.
You are of average
And-
intelligence
and
you're
the-
a wizard.
Right. And the way that we ran it, so I started with magic missile as like an early
Of course.
spell, right? And then the way the rules worked back then, I believe, is whenever you wanted to learn a new spell, you had to roll based on your int to see if you were successfully able to add that to your spell book. And basically, my int was so bad that I
Never-
basically never learned a new spell. So I was probably level like God knows what.
Magic
and
missile, brother.
all I had was magic missile.
That's it.
Basically, I was just a quarterstaff machine.
Fuck yeah.
By today's standards, I'm sure both narratively and mechanically it was hot garbage. But
That's so
that's
fun.
where I came from.
I can't imagine. I'm not familiar with 3.5. I do know that in 3.5 there are so many more options to be had when it comes to actions and to sort of quantifying what happens in a round or on a turn or whatever because of like the different things you have to add. There are many modifiers.
Mm-hmm.
And 5e, which is what I'm very familiar with, is super simplified. But I can't imagine that 3.5's process of making a character involved going in order stat-wise after choosing your class. It would make total sense to me if you could. I mean, it's completely irrelevant, really. If you roll first and then you're
And
like,
then you make a
okay,
thing, yeah.
obviously it limits your choices. But if you're open to doing that, then that's a great way to pick a class, right? If you're
Yeah.
like, okay, well, let's see. It you roll and then you're like you have like 8 strength and 17 charisma or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, like I can get away with a bard or a warlock, which is fine if you're super open to it. But
Yeah.
if you pick a class and then roll and you're just like the world's buffest wizard and all you do is magic missile, it's like, I mean, I guess that's fun
Yeah.
to an extent, but also it's like you're kind of a little bit limited on certain things.
I've seen in just from like surfing Reddit or whatever that I think some people do that almost as like the D&D like Nuzlocke challenge kind of
Sure.
a thing, right? Where it's
I love
just
it.
like, yep, I'm a fighter and I got 6 strength and 4 constitution, baby.
Yeah.
But it's fine. And I could see that being fun for something like a one shot, and it definitely would make for some non-traditional kind of fun things, right? Like, okay, I have super high intelligence and super high wisdom, and everything else is shit. Like, what's a character I can make that benefits in those 2 things? Like, just for me, because I enjoy the challenge of kind of optimizing builds based on certain limitations, I could see that being very fun. But when you're playing a wizard for like 2 years in a campaign and you're stuck with magic missile, results may vary.
Yeah, of course.
Results may vary.
Now, I do want to talk to you now that we sort of talked about like a very brief overview of our history with the game.
Yeah.
This is not going to be the last time that we do this, so we'll talk about that kind of stuff more as they come up. But I do want to ask you, because you brought up playing a wizard for 2 years. For those of us listening or watching at this point who, like I said before, haven't seen those first sort of 10 episodes that we did with the previous campaign. We'd run that campaign for about a year and a half, like I said, at the start of the pandemic, and then throughout it. and then at the tail end of that campaign was recorded. So we get to go back and like watch that. Those recordings, for the most part, as far as I recall, I believe there was only one session prior to that that included arguably my favorite player character I've ever been able to play with or to DM for, which was your wizard Misha, your time traveling wizard Misha. Now I can't. Well, we're going to talk about him for a little bit and your ideas behind that and whatnot, but I can't give away too much. Like I can answer questions, we can talk about that or whatever.
Yep.
I think that'd be interesting, but I can't give away too much because his story has such an unlimited potential. Even after, so spoiler alert if you haven't seen those episodes, that first campaign ended in a TPK, a total party kill, and Misha was a part of that last sort of iteration of that party. So Misha, for all intents and purposes, is dead. However, because of the nature of that character, there are many, many possibilities of what could or couldn't have happened or will happen or won't, whatever. But I just love him. I loved him so much. And let's just talk a little bit about him. Number one, you started off that campaign playing a Hexblade Warlock, which is a fucking awesome subclass.
Yeah.
What a great design, super cool. And that character also has an extended story because, as far as you know, that character is not dead.
Yep.
In the middle of that campaign, circumstances happened to which Matt made a few choices that allowed him to unwittingly move on to a new character. Like, you didn't know that I was going to do what I did.
Correct.
You just made the choices that you believe Revelry would want, which was the name of the character. And also that you thought were cool and interesting. And,
Correct.
That led to Revelry accepting a dark deal with one of my gods in my homebrew pantheon, and he basically was transformed into a Death Knight, which is like my favorite monster in like the zeitgeist of Dungeons and Dragons. I love the Death Knight.
Just quick aside, Sal and I, we chat about the game outside of not only our specific game, but also just the game of D&D, the design, the flavor, all these things. And we happen to be in sort of, we'll call it a dungeon, just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Where, characters were in a dungeon, and there was something guarding our way. Yep. And I texted Sal. I was like, hey, by the way, I'm planning on doing this. And it was kind of just like ... And then in all caps, that is a baller move.
Yeah. And I was very excited.
To which I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
Right. And then we get into the situation, and it's funny when you're a player, and obviously you don't really know what the consequences of your choices and actions are always going to be.
Yeah.
And as it was coming, you just try to do your best to make not only to be true to the character that you're playing, but also kind of make the moments impactful. And yes, that was an example where I essentially walked away from my first, again, not my first character, but the first character I really lived in sort of a modern sense, without having any warning or intention of doing so. But it did lead the way to create this new character, Misha, who I loved and you loved. And
I love Revelry as well. I thought that, and so in addition to that, to sort of build on why I really, really love these characters. I mean, obviously, Matt, you're a close friend of mine, and I love you. But you're a really incredible performer. And actually, correct me if I'm wrong. I can't remember this. I feel like you told me this, and maybe I'm just remembering a memory. But the first time that you stepped on stage in a sort of like fully realized production of like a play or a musical or just sort of anything of that matter, besides playing live music, which you've done for a long time, was fairly recently.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Yeah. So how long ago was that? 4 years now.
I want to say it was 2018.
Okay.
Even when I was in like middle school, high school, they'd be like, oh, we want you to put on, like, I remember I was like in like 7th grade and we were reading The Giver or something like that. And they were like, okay, I want you to get in groups of 4 and make a little skit. And perform
that, yeah,
something. And I was the type of kid that I literally would have like faked having to throw up to avoid having to do that.
Sure.
Just because I guess, even though I've been a musician for a long time, taking on a role as sort of like an actor feels like literally the most vulnerable thing you can do.
I would argue it is. Yeah. One of them, yeah.
And so yeah, I had gone out of my way to avoid ever having to do any of that stuff. And then it just so worked out that because I'm a singer and I love music, and my mom was an actress, in school and growing up, that in the back of my mind it was always something like, if you ever stop being such a coward, maybe this is something that you'd really like. And I did eventually try out for a production of a musical at my local theater, which is where you and I eventually met. So I had never done any acting of any kind until the last 2-3 years.
Which is wild to me. This is the segment of our podcast where I just compliment you for a little while. It's wild to me because, for two reasons, right? So we met doing a show together, right? Mm-hmm. We performed. You were on the ensemble for that show, and we just sort of became friends because of how often we were working together. We had a few fight scenes and whatnot, and you were the fight captain, and we had similar interests in everything, obviously, and you're super cool, and I'm all right, and so we became friends. It wasn't until you got, I don't remember. Well, you were the full-fledged leading man in the next show that I had gotten to see you in, which was Stephen Sondheim's company, the late Stephen Sondheim's company. And you knocked it out of the fucking park. And I was like, oh shit. Like, I knew you were talented, obviously. But yeah, you knocked that out of the park. And I was just like, damn, that's so cool. And around the same time, we were really talking, and that's where I met Jenna. Jenna is one of our fellow close friends and players in our game. And
Jamie was in company as well.
Jamie was in company as well.
That's where we met Jamie.
Oh, but did I know? No, because company happened before Mamma Mia?
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't really meet Jamie there, but I got to know Jamie during Mamma Mia.
Yeah, and I don't think you had really even met Jenna at the time.
I met her.
That was kind of our connection, but
I met her, but like I didn't know her.
Right.
Just whatever.
Yeah.
And so basically that was around the time that we started talking about, like, hey, I mean, we had mentioned it when we did our first show together, and just like, oh yeah, we should play D&D together. Like, I DM, blah, 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 you haven't played in a hot minute, but you love to, blah, 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 all this stuff. And so that was around the time that we were really solidifying that, right? And then eventually it came to fruition some time later. And I think it was right around the time that I had sort of pitched the idea to you guys that I would want to start recording these sessions, not just because I recorded those Zoom sessions so that I could just rewatch them so I could make my notes and everything.
Easy
like
notes,
that.
right?
It's easy notes, which I highly recommend to any Dungeon Master. If you're playing over Zoom, super easy, just hit the record button on your Zoom and it'll record the meeting, and just watch that over. If you have the means to record your things, either audio-wise or video-wise, just like throw your phone up or something like that. It's so much easier to do that and just watch your session back, and so you can just take your notes and like be like, oh, I made this character up on the spot and I didn't like write it down.
Right.
What did I sound like? What did I do? Like that happens a lot.
Yeah.
But I had pitched the idea to sort of like, oh, I want to do this as like a live stream. Because I had always wanted to do that, and the biggest reason I think was because, number one, I felt as though our game was super entertaining in the sense of it's engaging and interesting, and there aren't really other shows out there. I mean, there's one, but there aren't really other shows out there in which you really get people sitting in a character, right? Like, we have fun and we have our jokes and everything like that, but most games are played with a foundation of jovialness where no one is really like, I'm in it. You know what I mean? Like, you're in it to an extent and you care. Like, people fucking, that's the beauty of this game. People fucking care. Like, this is an extension of you, you know what I mean? And it's awesome. But I remember, I think it was the ending of like our first big arc, where we were all sitting right upstairs around my family's dinner table.
Yeah, we had finally had a few don't know if it was a few weeks where it felt like the pandemic was kind of relaxing.
Yep.
People had started to kind of get semi back to normal,
Yep.
and we were like, okay, we're gonna get together,
Mhm.
and we were able to just before things really cracked back down again,
Uh-huh.
we were able to end that arc in person, which was lovely.
Yes, which was super cool. And yeah, it was that session that we played where it was just like so intimate and intense. The combat sort of worked out perfectly. There were sacrifices. There were like choices that like you were playing around with, and oh my god, there was an interaction that you had with Jenna that was incredible. It was just super fucking cool, and getting to see you go from that and then it wasn't really a 180, but the character turn that we went with going from that to Misha was just so cool because Misha's an entirely different character than Revelry. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Misha,
Yeah.
our favorite time traveling wizard. To set you up, what we ended up going with, sort of, mechanically, we used Matt Mercer's chronergy sort of
Yep.
wizard situation in their Wildmount game guide or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
and that worked out well. But yeah, like, let's talk about them. So
Yeah.
basically, I guess my first question is, I kind of know to the extent of the inspiration behind him, but why don't you take over on that, and you can flesh that out a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. So a few things went through my head. First of all, like you said, or you sort of alluded to, my first character, Revelry, was I mean, the audience knows you're playing a Hexblade Warlock who's, I don't know if you said this, but who's also a Tiefling. Like, this is a character with like a sad, maybe abusive past or whatever, right? Who's been through some trauma. Nobody plays a happy Tiefling who's a Hexblade Warlock. But this was also, my first character, and I certainly have my own kind of emotional struggles, and so that character had a lot of burdensome feelings to contend with.
Yeah.
And
I
carried.
think that everybody's first character, either off the rip or like coming back or whatever,
Yeah.
everybody's first character is just them.
Right, whether they know it or not, it's just
like,
them.
I
Right?
mean, even I won't get too far out of this, but even Jenna, like, she came to the table with this idea for her first character, which was Taj, which was in the most different character than she ended up actually playing. Like, what she pitched to me was like sort of your classic rogue.
Right, she wanted to be like a swashbuckler, like
And
big bravado.
As soon as we started playing, immediately it was just Jenna,
right?
and which is great,
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that that's pretty much how it should be. Or take a full 180 and do something completely different and separate yourself.
Well,
from
because
it.
it's a way to, it's like therapeutic, right?
It is
It's a
totally
way,
therapeutic.
it's a way to share your feelings in a way that feels less vulnerable. Because
Yes.
it's sort of like, hey, I have this friend
Right.
who's suffering from this problem.
Yep.
It's definitely not
Definitely
me.
not me.
But let me tell you about him.
Yep.
But anyway, so I was playing this character Revelry, and then when came time to make a new character, a couple things went through my head. Is one, I wanted them to be significantly different.
Sure.
It had also occurred to me that as someone, not to make this a downer for a second, because it's not, it's fine,
that's
but as someone that does like suffer from like depression and anxiety,
Yep.
that maybe living in a fantasy character who also suffers from depression and anxiety, maybe questionable from a mental health
do
perspective.
something a bit better than that. I don't know.
So,
Who knows?
so that was one thing. I wanted the next character to be sort of less burdened by sort of the weight of the world.
Right.
The second thing that I thought of, so that was sort of my personal desire at that moment. The second thing is I thought, because this was not a TPK, this is just where we're replacing one character with another, is I
Right.
thought, what would be interesting for the narrative that we're in? And so rather than just make a kind of a random character that is from a random place and
Right.
whatever.
A drag and drop character, really. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
right,
Like, you
exactly.
could just sort of lift this and.
Oh, this is a
whatever.
cool warrior. He was a,
Right.
fought in the war and whatever.
Boom, yeah.
So at the time, we were dealing with sort of a conspiracy. We were trying to unravel a conspiracy that was centered in a wizard school.
Yep.
And the thing is, none of us were wizards.
Nope.
None of us were from the wizard school. And so, when you're a bunch of outsiders and you're trying to unravel a conspiracy that is deep, and covered by powerful people. I had thought to myself as a player in the sessions previous, man, it would be really cool if there was like a whistleblower or somebody from inside that like suddenly appeared and was trying to like whatever. And so that was sort of like, oh, I could play basically a defector
Yeah.
or a whistleblower from High Wreath Academy, and that would open up aspects of the narrative that were previously clouded to us.
Right.
So from those two things, I started to build the character. So that's when I knew I wanted to be a wizard. The third thing that I did, which was interesting, and this is going to get like a 1% political for a second,
whatever.
is obviously we live in a time right now where there's some crazy conspiracy theories that are being touted all the time.
You're not a lizard, are you? I'll edit it out. I'll edit it out.
Cut this.
Yep,
Cut this.
No, to the cameras.
Anyway, and so the third thing that I just thought would be fun is what would it be like to play a high intelligence character who is susceptible to crazy theories?
Sure.
Because normally we might suggest that people who believe in wild theories are
not.
maybe then at least if not average intelligence, definitely not like above average intelligence, right? And so I thought, what if I just play this incredibly smart, 18, 20 intelligence character who is susceptible to wild tangents of logic. So those were kind of the building blocks that went into Misha. And yeah, I from there I began constructing this character who at least believes that they're the first time traveler.
Yeah.
And what was so interesting about it is they clearly have power and wield magic that might make you think that it's a reasonable, thing to say.
Absolutely.
This person casts spells like slow. They seem to have some knowledge of what might happen in the future in little aspects. And so there's that, it could be true, but also he never really presents any hard evidence.
Right.
He never even suggests that he has any hard evidence. He just wholly believes it to be true.
Fully believes it to be true.
And what was really fun about the way that the other PCs interacted with him is I expected them to maybe challenge this notion directly. What do you mean you're a time traveler?
Right.
Of course you're not. Like, show me some evidence. But they never did.
They never did.
And we just kind of had fun with it, where I fully believed it, and they kind of were just like, "Oh, Misha, that crazy Misha."
Yeah.
And so that was very fun, and Misha, died without revealing whether or not that was true.
Yeah.
And to be honest, neither you nor I have ever had the discussion like, is this definitely really true, or is it definitely really not true? It's just even you and I left it like, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true.
Know. Especially because I think what really made that character work was the fact that you didn't know if it was true or not.
Right.
Because I think that there's a distinct difficulty in if you knew that the whole time, and let's say basically we tried to keep everything as the same as it was when you didn't know, right? There's a level of difficulty in doing that, and then also playing the game and all these things, and then you're just constantly bombarded with, like, if, Garrett or Jenna or Jamie or whatever are like, oh, is it true, or blah, blah, or whatever, then you have to field all these things.
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot more sense, especially with this subject, like with time traveling, if you just believe yourself to be, like, eventually you will time travel or whatever, and, like, obviously that could have happened, and then, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's such a funny concept.
Well, the way I presented it is how do I want to say this? The way I presented it was always, like, said in a weird way, like, I eventually am already the first time traveler.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
Which is genius. So
funny.
funny.
Yeah, I mean, no proof needed.
Nope.
I definitely did.
Yeah.
But I haven't yet. I can't show you because
I haven't done it yet.
Well, but I did do it.
100% you did it.
Yeah.
I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah, except I did.
Right.
Right.
Before.
Before I eventually did it.
Before you eventually did it, it was done.
Right. Exactly.
So
it was great. And then you throw on the Russian accent.
And it just sells
it. It just sells it, yeah.
It really sells it. It was such a good, man. Like, it's such a clever character, you know what I mean? Like, not to say that, I'm not saying that the rest of our party members' characters are not clever. I love them. But Misha, there was something about it, especially because it was wholly built on something that I created, like, in the game, right? Like, this is not a knock on anybody else. It's very easy to create a character that is like, oh, okay, they did this, and they have this family, and then, okay, so, like, how does that fit into this world? Whereas the way you approached it was, all right, so there's this thing in your world, and I'm interested in it. I want to build a character around that thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was super fulfilling to me because that hadn't really happened before.
And that's so fun.
It hasn't happened in other games either.
And that's so fun too. It's definitely something I'd recommend for people, whether they're doing a homebrew setting or a classic setting. Yeah. Is, there's a big difference between, and if you look at a lot of the, there's a lot of races in particular in the D&D kind of catalog that you can play anywhere, but that just don't like I would never play a Gith because they're so tied to that world. Yeah. It wouldn't make sense to just put them somewhere. They have this whole lore about them. But like whatever setting you're playing in or whatever world you're playing in, if you can, instead of just being like the classic grizzled veteran or the eccentric inventor, if you can be, I'm an eccentric inventor of this specific thing from this specific family, and tie it, tie it to something that's in the world specifically, then it just feels so much more, I guess, fully realized, right? Yeah. Because instead of just being like, this is stuff that I made up, like, especially if you're building a character mid-campaign.
Oh, 100%.
Right? In fact, and it's so fun. Like, if you end up having a character that dies and you get to make a character mid-campaign, think of what part of the world you haven't gotten to see yet.
Yep.
And, use that as an opportunity to bring that in.
And immediately there's your access to that part of the world that you haven't seen.
I mean, that's like metagaming genius.
Right? I know,
like,
right? Exactly.
Like, Sal, you haven't let us see the inside of that fucking mine or whatever. Right. I know there's good shit down there. I want to be the foreman of the mine. And he's like,
now I know.
Cool. Now you know. Hey, here's your secrets.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
it's awesome. It's an easy way to understand that kind of stuff. I was hoping that. I was hoping that, unfortunately, that campaign came to an end.
Yeah.
Which things like that kind of happen. There were a few times where, I'll be honest with this. Now that we have sort of moved on from that, and I've done a better job of balancing things and keeping you guys as players balanced in the world. A big problem with how I have been sort of approaching certain things is that I would often give too many magic items or too much wealth to my players very quickly. A lot of different people would actually suggest, and actually Matt Colville is a prominent person who suggests that the more magic items, the better. Like, the reason why people play this game is for, like, loot and, like, for other things. Not the only reason, but a big reason is, like, winning.
Sure.
Right? And that's a great feeling. And I agree with that to an extent. But the problem becomes, if you award too many rewards, unless you're extremely, like, Matt Colville is very good at this. Unless you're very good at fucking game design and, like, designing monsters that are balanced based on the rewards you gave. If I gave each of you, like, 3 magic items or whatever, which I basically did, and I picked any raw monster from the player's handbook, any CR, like, 10 monster is nothing to you for, even though technically 3 to 4 level 10 players, it should be challenging to an extent for a CR 10 monster. That's just how the challenge ratings work. But that's just not the case when you give magic items and fucking a bunch of gold and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I took that back. But at the time, you guys just sort of happened into a combat that I wanted to be challenging. And at the top of the combat, just rolled really bad. And in order for the combat to be challenging, the monsters had to be difficult to deal with because of the amount of power that you guys had.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have that much power, and then I have to make the difficulty harder, and you just fail to execute with that, which just happens sometimes with the dice, then it becomes a horrible snowball where you're just especially as soon as one of you goes down, immediately everything gets bad.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to see that sort of storyline come to fruition, which it kind of did, because the next campaign happens 15 years after that, and this is the result of that sort of conspiracy, which is a unified, quote unquote unified, or unified for whatever means, sort of country where you guys were adventuring in.
It's sort of the result of the war that was breaking out at the end of our last campaign. Yeah.
Exactly, yes. And, for better or for worse, I mean, your new characters don't really know or understand the ramifications, if there are any or whatever, and everything seems to be pretty chill right now.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to be back in, like, the low-level play, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it feels great. I know Jenna's a big fan of it, which is super fun. It forces you to get creative, with what you have.
Yeah.
And as much as I'm going to be limiting you here and there, I'm still going to be rewarding and whatnot, especially because those first 2 sessions were fucking phenomenal, in my opinion. So that's always super fun. But, so jumping forward a little bit then, we go from Revelry to Misha, and now we have Kill.
Yes.
QIL, Kill the Turtle. Again, one of my favorite characters. Like, so fucking genius, hilarious. And I loved, you sent me a text last night, or this morning, I can't remember, that one of our viewers, so if you're listening to this, shouts out to you, had mentioned in chat that Kill reminded them, or gave them Ted Lasso vibes. And then our chat moderator, Michaela, responded to that saying, I always thought Matthew McConaughey, but that's good too. And you sent me a text saying, like, I fucking did it, because your inspiration for this sort of characteristic for this character is sort of a combination between the two of them.
Yeah, that's why I texted you. I've been waffling on a few different ideas, and then my last text to you was like, I don't know exactly what's going to come out of my mouth, but it's going to be somewhere on the scale of Matthew McConaughey and Ted Lasso. And so when I saw that, I felt very validated.
Oh my god,
yeah, I was very happy to see that.
It's so good. And yeah, so I highly recommend, if you're listening to this and you haven't watched the game, go watch the game. It's great. We love it. This podcast is not going to solely be about the game, but it's our first episode. It's probably a good idea to understand what we do, why we do it, and how long we've been doing it and whatnot. But if you haven't seen those first 2 episodes, please go watch them. It helps us out. It supports us, which is super cool. And if you're listening to this and you haven't seen that, you're gonna like that. I really think you're gonna like those first 2 episodes. I don't know necessarily when this is gonna come out. I think the 3rd episode will probably be live before this comes out. I have to do a little bit of editing, but who knows?
Yeah. My dad watched it, and his feedback was it was way more interesting than I expected.
Hell yeah!
So
that's exactly what we're going for.
That's exactly what we're going for. More interesting or entertaining, one or the other, maybe both.
Either way, awesome.
So that's what we're going for. More interesting / entertaining than you expected,
which is great. It's original, like off the rip. It's kind of a hard sell to anyone who has never played the game before or whatever, or however, like just not been exposed to it. But legitimately, I think it's really no different than fucking binging whatever TV show that you want to watch. You know what I mean? Like, it's really no different besides it's just bare bones and in your head.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If you were like, I really loved Game of Thrones, I wish each episode was 4 times slower.
Yeah.
And I know that might sound like not appealing, but in a sense, it's just that, like, there's no like TV schedule that forces pacing to we're not trying to accomplish an entire story arc in 10 weeks or whatever, right? And so it's just you're meeting these fantasy characters and you're following them as they move through the world, and you're getting to see what they do, learn who they are. I mean, it's really as simple as that. And for some that maybe don't have the sort of interest or fascination or sort of attention span, they might
Right.
find the pacing slow,
Sure.
admittedly. But for others that that really love to get into it and see those small interactions, right? When you're watching like a TV show, and we're getting a little bit away from the character stuff, but just
No,
for a
it's
minute,
whatever.
you know, if you're watching like a TV show or whatever, you don't you there's probably 4 hours of filmed content for every 45 minutes
Sure.
of what airs, right?
Right.
And so in our game, you get to see kind of the director's cut.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you get to see all the little conversations. You get to see all the little, like, you know, mannerisms and little bits and pieces. And, you know, and it's all very fun. And your narration is excellent. So,
Thank you.
you know, if you, it's kind of like, you know, they say like a picture's worth 1,000 words, but there's something special about when you're reading a book and you're reading a description of a place and you see it in your mind's eye. I think that you notice it more. It feels, you know, more kind of emotional to it. If you're like when you're watching Game of Thrones or whatever, and they walk into the woods, you're not like, holy shit, those woods are gorgeous.
Yeah, right.
Because you're looking at the characters, you're thinking
Yeah.
about what's going to happen. But when you're reading a book and they're describing the wood and the way the
Yep.
leaves move and the way the sun rays, you know, come through the canopy and the, you know, the way that the you know, flora comes up from the ground and the chirping of the birds and the crickets and the way that you were kind of weaving the narration in that way makes you, I think, you know, really be able to see it, feel it. I mean, I certainly feel like I can see it and feel it. But those are things that you don't get when you're, you know, watching a visual media or
Right.
whatever. And so, if I just said, hey, you should watch our show, it's like Game of Thrones, but slow.
Yeah.
You know,
It's just
people would
slow
probably be
Game of
like, nah, I'll pass. But like,
Right.
if you think about it, like, no, this is a way to like read a book that is being written in real time.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
probably the best way to sort of
I
describe
think that's
it.
probably the best description of our form of play
Yeah.
that there is. Yeah, I mean, literally, like reading a book that's being written in real time. Like that's, yeah, I think that's a perfect summation. Which reminds me, this memory just sort of popped up in my head, and we'll get back to Kill in a second. But so first of all, thank you for saying that about my narration. The way I sort of write and go about those things, because I also consider myself a writer because I write short stories. I'm working on like a few different like screenplays and whatnot and all whatever. I write a bunch of different things, and then obviously I write for this. And the way you approach each medium is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way it's so funny. So I have this memory of two separate memories. The first time I ever read The Lord of the Rings, and the first time I ever read The Chronicles of Narnia happened around the same time. I was in fifth grade, and The Chronicles of Narnia. I went to a Lutheran elementary private school or whatever, and so C.S. Lewis was like the holy grail of literature to them, which is C.S. Lewis is a great writer.
Yeah.
I enjoyed his stuff. Chronicles of Narnia is super fun. It's easy to read, and that was the point, right? Tolkien is not difficult to read, but it's not easy to read, right? It's not meant for, like, I mean, The Hobbit is, but
Can I admit something right now?
yeah, go for it.
I own the Fellowship
Yeah.
series trilogy, and after reading 80 pages about the way the grass moves in the Shire, I tapped out.
I understand.
I've thought about rereading it so many
completely
times,
understand.
and I never did.
Listen, man, again, completely understand. So funny. But that's a perfect example because because they were like good friends, Tolkien
Oh, I
and
didn't know
C.S.
that.
Lewis. Yeah. And so, and they would jib each other all the time and whatnot. But the hard difference was, I remember I read Lord of the Rings, I had to have been 10 or 11. And I mean, I really liked it. And it was because there were 80 pages about the grass in
Yeah.
the Shire, and there was like a whole fucking 5-page thing about a door or whatever. When I was young and like I was just consuming fantasy content, I was like, holy shit, like it was so engrossing to me because I had all the time in the world. You know what I mean? I was
right.
fucking 11. What was I doing? Nothing. I was reading. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then for school, I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because I believe also around that time, 5th or 6th grade or whatever, was when The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe film came out. So my 5th grade or 6th grade teacher like was like, oh yeah, we got to read this. I'm pretty sure it was 5th grade, and so we did, and I liked it. There's a paragraph devoted to the description of Mr. Tumnus, a paragraph. But in that paragraph, you basically get a full understanding of who this person is. Whereas in Tolkien, it would have taken him quite some time to describe who Mr. Tumnus is. To that extent, I love to that extent, there really is no, in C.S. Lewis's work, at least in that paragraph, it's very much just like, I wrote this, you have an understanding of this character, and that's who that character is. And the diction in it is okay, like it's not meant to be high diction. Right. But the diction in Tolkien and some others like Pat Rothfuss, who's a big inspiration of mine, Joe Abercrombie as well, the diction is high, it's elevated. And that's why it takes so long to tell these things. But I don't have that much time, right? We're really only playing for like 3.5 to 4 hours, which seems to other people like a long time. But once a week, that's not that much time, especially considering I'm not doing 4 hours of narration. I'm doing, maybe out of all of that, maybe I'm doing 25, 30 minutes. The rest of it is you guys interacting, us rolling, doing combat or whatever. And I like to make combat flavorful or whatever. I highly recommend that. But I like to try that medium of, I like using heightened diction because it's something I like. I mean, I'm a Shakespearean as well. So it's something I like to hear. I think it's pleasing to the ear. Mm-hmm. But what I choose to say can't just be because it sounds nice. I have to cut into who these people are, and which, I mean, sort of leads me back to getting into Kill, because I think you found that sort of fun middle of, he doesn't necessarily say much, but he has a lot of interest in what he says. Every time the things that he says reveals who he is. Yeah. Which is the in my opinion, I love characters that keep secrets. I love having a secret as a character. I legitimately, I think that every character should have at least one secret. Because that will inform how you perform. But I also love characters who every time they speak or interact, you just get a better understanding of them, right? And that's what you have with Kill, I think. And I'm super excited to see where it goes and where you take it and whatnot, and how you react to certain things.
Yeah, thanks, man. I had some, but I have found, I think it's so interesting that the different races that are available to you in this game are not all humans. And as much as the way that some people might think that a dragonborn is a scaly human and an elf is a pointy-eared human, and a halfling is a short human, that's just not the case.
No.
And if you look at the established lore that's in the player's handbook and all these things, but I think that that's effectively how many people play them. Is 100%. I think tieflings are dope. They look cool.
But I'm a person, not a tiefling. Or a person isn't. I'm a human. It's exactly as you say.
Because
you're just portraying a human who looks a little different.
Right, and because frankly, like we've said, is most people's D&D characters are versions of themselves, and we are all humans playing this game.
Exactly.
So one thing that I set out is I wanted to play what I would consider to be not one of like the top 5 most commonly picked races, which would be like human, elf, halfling, tiefling, something like that, right? Just because there's so many of them.
Right.
And then 2, I really wanted to pick. Whatever race I picked, I really wanted to play them in a way that felt not just like, in this case, a green human with a shell on his back.
Exactly.
And so that was sort of my stated goal when I started making this character. When they started coming together, I started reading first of all, I've always just liked turtles.
Sure.
And I really like
turtles.
And I really like mushrooms.
Yeah,
and so I ended up just saying, I like turtles, I like mushrooms. I heard you like mushrooms, I'm going to put a mushroom in your turtle. And whatever.
Shake it all up.
But anyway, and then when I started reading the established lore of turtles, which is not extensive.
No.
It's like a page or two. But they had some very key sort of aspects to them. They're very friendly. Yep. They're very self-reliant. Mm-hmm. They, despite the fact that they're friendly, they're perfectly comfortable being solitary. Not solitary, but isolated.
Yes.
but then like that's a very non-human thing for most people, right?
Oh no, that's
Most humans don't like being
intrinsically
isolated
different. Yeah, yeah.
and become desperate for connection,
Or
right?
attention
Where
or something. Yeah.
turtles don't. So that's something I wanted to play. There's a very human thing about there's no neutral humans, right?
No,
There
there
are
really isn't.
there are well, for most of us we have both good and evil inside of us,
Right, of course.
and most of us we have kind of both lawful and chaos inside of us, right? But how many actually neutral characters do people play in D&D?
I argue it's to such a low percentage that you might as well say it doesn't ever happen.
Right.
Like, I'm sure there's one person somewhere who truly played an actually neutral person. Sure.
Yeah.
But probably not.
And so right, most people are either saving the princess, rescuing the innocents, good guys, lawful guys, and then there's murder hobos and chaos for the sake of chaos,
That's
which
right.
is fun.
Super fun.
But there's something about when I was reading Turtles and how like they view their home as the shell on their back, not where they're from. If their home gets attacked, that's not my home. This is my home. I'll just fuck off. I mean, there's something very interestingly neutral about them.
Oh yeah.
And so I wanted that to come across in this character as well. So in sort of the genesis of this character, it's interesting to be like friendly and warm, but also not necessarily good.
Right.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And so that led me. And then I also had this headcanon about how because it's all about their passing of knowledge from generation to generation, that the turtle race would not survive if the information they passed was not good.
Right.
Right. If turtles were like, don't drink water, that's how the devil gets inside of you, then the next turtle would just die of dehydration, right? And so there has
the devil gets inside of you.
so there has to be some
Oh my God.
some aspect of these turtles. These turtles are they just have a powerful intuition about what's true and what is not.
Sure.
So that's I want to play this high wisdom, proficiency in insight turtle. And so how do you make a character that has high insight and is friendly, but also is not inherently good? And that kind of got the mind going about how, well, I could play this character who's very who sees people in a way that others don't, who really sees like what they want, who they are. In our first episode, we meet a bartender who is the daughter of the owner of the bar, and he could tell right away that these are not her aspirations. She feels stuck following her father's wishes for her, and he makes a comment to a woman he just met that like, hey, you should follow your dreams, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, 100%.
But that's not out of the goodness of his heart or any like good versus evil. That's simply because he likes people and he sees something in her that maybe she doesn't see in herself, and makes that comment. And so I think as the campaign continues, we'll see more aspects of, well, why is this like? Because most people probably think this is an incredibly sweet, good person. And I think that that's true, but in a non-human sense, I think you'll see moments when maybe he doesn't find things worthy of worry.
Yep.
Because like, well, we could try to help these people, but we could also help the people that are trying to hurt the people, right? Like their aspirations versus their aspirations. There's like I hope that they both get what they want, right? Why would I help either side? There's no, that kind of sense. So I think it's been very interesting for me to develop. It's been very interesting for me to play, and I think I do love that who he is comes across in everything that he says, and I think there will be a lot of really great moments, as we move forward, where frankly, I reveal more of him, but I also discover more of him, which is a really bizarre thing to think about, right? This is somebody that I created, and yet I'm learning about them as we go. It's very cool.
That, at this point, I think that's a perfect way to sort of bookend this first episode. I think that that's the biggest magic of Dungeons and Dragons in general, is that if you care enough about the game and your character, you create someone in real time, and then like when you're not playing, of course you're thinking about them and the game in general, but really you're not really creating until you're playing, right? And so you create this person in real time, and you learn about them in real time, and then vice versa, you learn a little bit more about yourself and everything like that, right? So like it sort of comes back around to that sense of it's a therapeutic situation, you know what I mean? It's something that I crave, and you know, just in solidarity with you, like as someone who also suffers from depression and anxiety and whatnot. Like this is like the kind of camaraderie and you know whatnot, like the kind of stuff that I crave, basically. Like I said before, and you know, I think that in this character in particular, Kill, is going to be really, really fun to get to know, both from behind the screen and on your end too. I'm sure I can speak for you. But yeah, I think that we've had a pretty solid convo the past few minutes and whatnot. So thank you to everyone who chose to listen to this. We're going to be doing this regularly, trying to be doing this once a week, best we can. Like I'm not entirely sure what the schedule is going to look like. I don't want to put this out on the same day that our stream comes out. Maybe the day before or the day after.
Sure.
And who knows? We might break this up into a little bit more of a segmented kind of situation, or we might just keep doing it freestyle and whatnot. But if you're listening to this and you're a part of our Discord community, please post in the Discord about certain things that you might, you know, like to hear from us or whatnot, or just see on the podcast in general. You know, if this is not, like I said, this is not meant to be like a supplementary thing to our actual stream, but you know, if you want us to talk more about that or whatever, if you want me to ask Matt some questions about some choices that he made, or you know, I'm sure eventually we'll have some of the other players on, we can talk about that. We'll definitely do that, but we're going to be talking about a whole handful of other things, how to play or not how to play the game, but how we like to play the game, the best, you know, our favorite things and whatnot, new things that we think of, some tips and whatnot for anybody who's looking to play. All these sorts of things. It's really going to be mostly a podcast about Dungeons and Dragons, because I don't really see too many of those. You know, I see a lot of podcasts of actual play, which is awesome. But you know, I don't get to listen to enough people just talk about my favorite game. You know what I mean? So might as well talk to one of my best friends about it and you know, fuck around. You know?
Yeah.
So, oh yeah. Well, thanks for listening. This has been a Little Dicey podcast. I've been Salvatore. He's been Matt. And we will see you next time. Peace.
See ya.
Oh yeah, brother.
Hell yeah.
Nice.
That was good.
That was some good shit.